My mother-in-law tore the scarf from my neck in front of 180 wedding guests, smiled at my scars and said, "No wonder you look like a monster." For a second, nobody moved. The ballroom at the Grand Hotel in Birmingham went so quiet I could hear the ice clink in somebody's glass. My blue silk scarf was lying on the polished floor between Beverly's silver heels and my own shaking hands. I reached for my neck, but it was too late. The scars ran from just below my left ear down across my collarbone and under the shoulder of my navy dress. Burn marks, shrapnel lines, old skin that never learned how to look normal again. I had spent years choosing high collars, soft scarves, careful angles in photographs. Not because I was ashamed of serving, I wasn't. I had been an army medic for almost 20 years. But there are some parts of war you don't want discussed over crab cakes and champagne. Beverly tilted her head like she was admiring a cracked vase at a yard sale. Well, she said just loud enough for the front tables to hear. Now everybody can stop wondering why she hides herself. A couple of guests gave nervous laughs. One woman actually covered her mouth, but I could see her smile through her fingers. I looked past Beverly to my husband, Mark. He was standing by the head table in his gray suit, one hand still wrapped around a glass of bourbon. His face had gone pale, but he didn't come to me. He didn't pick up my scarf. He didn't tell his mother to stop. Mark one said quietly. Beverly turned toward him like she owned the room. "Tell her not to make a scene. This is Tyler's wedding." Tyler was my stepson. I had helped raise him from 15 on through braces, breakups, college applications, and the year he thought he wanted to become a professional poker player because he won $80 at a church raffle. His bride Emily stood frozen near the cake table, her bouquet hanging at her side. Mark finally moved, but not toward me. He stepped beside his mother. "Claire," he said, keeping his voice low, "please, just go freshen up." Freshen up. Like I had spilled wine on my dress. Like his mother hadn't just stripped away the one thing I had asked everyone to leave alone. I bent down, picked up my scarf, and held it in my fist. My fingers wouldn't stop trembling. That was when Beverly gave a little smile, the kind she used at Sunday brunch when she'd found a new way to insult me without raising her voice. And across the ballroom, the double doors opened. My father walked in wearing a dark suit, holding a small cream envelope in his hand. He took one look at me. Then he started toward the stage. My father had always taught me that the loudest person in the room wasn't necessarily the strongest one. Sometimes the strongest person was the one who stayed calm long enough to let the truth speak for itself. As I watched him walk across that ballroom, I wanted to believe everything was about to change. Instead, I turned away. I wasn't ready to face another audience. I slipped through the side doors into the hallway, clutching my scarf against my chest. The noise from the reception faded behind me until all I could hear was the hum of the air conditioner and the click of my heels on the marble floor. The ladies' room was empty. I locked myself inside the largest stall and finally let myself cry. Not loud, just enough to let the pressure out. I hadn't cried like that in years. Not after Afghanistan. Not after retirement. Not even after my shoulder surgeries. Yet somehow one sentence from Beverly Walker had cut deeper than shrapnel ever had. "No wonder you look like a monster." I stared at the blue scarf in my hands. I'd bought it 3 years earlier at a little boutique in downtown Huntsville. Soft silk, navy with tiny silver flowers stitched into the corners. It wasn't expensive, but I loved it because it covered the scars without drawing attention. Most people never asked questions. That's exactly how I liked it. People often assume veterans want to tell war stories. Some do. I didn't. I spent 19 years in the U.S. Army as a combat medic. My job wasn't chasing medals. It was keeping people alive. The scars on my neck and shoulder came during my final deployment in Afghanistan. A convoy had been hit outside Kandahar. The explosion flipped the lead vehicle. I remembered smoke so thick it blocked the sun. The smell of burning fuel. Someone screaming for help. Training takes over in moments like that. You stop thinking about yourself. You move. I pulled one soldier out through a shattered window. Then another. The second blast caught me before I reached cover. The burns healed. Mostly. The skin never did. Neither did some of the memories. When I retired at 41, I promised myself I wouldn't let those scars become my identity. I volunteered twice a week at the VA hospital in Huntsville. I gardened. I learned to bake sourdough bread that always came out a little too dense. Life became wonderfully ordinary. Then I married Mark. We'd met at a charity golf tournament for veterans. He was kind, patient, funny in the dry dad joke sort of way. After losing his first wife to cancer, he'd spent years raising Tyler alone. When we married, Tyler was 15. He wasn't looking for another mother. I wasn't trying to replace one. Over time, though, we found our rhythm. I helped him study for algebra. He taught me how to stream football games without accidentally buying 6 different subscriptions. By the time he graduated high school, he hugged me before walking across the stage. "Love you, Claire," he'd whispered. I still remember how proud I felt. Beverly never liked any of it. From the beginning, she treated me like a temporary guest in her son's life. At family dinners, she'd introduce me as Mark's army wife. Not Claire. Not family. Just the woman who happened to be there. Whenever someone complimented dinner, she'd smile sweetly. "Oh, Claire doesn't really cook Southern food. If someone admired our house. Well, Mark bought it long before she came along." Every comment sounded harmless by itself. Together, they wore you down. Mark always had the same response. "That's just Mom. It's easier not to argue. She doesn't mean anything by it." I wanted to believe him. I really did. Because loving someone sometimes means convincing yourself their excuses make sense. Standing in that restroom, I finally wondered if I'd spent too many years protecting everyone else's peace while quietly giving away my own. Then someone knocked gently on the door. "Claire," it was Emily. Her voice was shaking. "Please, can I come in? There's something you need to know." Emily stepped into the restroom and quietly closed the door behind her. Her makeup was still perfect, but I could tell she'd been crying. A bride shouldn't look that exhausted 30 minutes into her own reception. She looked at the scarf in my hands before meeting my eyes. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. I managed a tired smile. "You don't owe me an apology." "Yes, I do." She leaned against the sink and folded her arms. "Because I saw it coming and I didn't stop it. For a second I didn't understand." "What do you mean?" Emily lowered her voice. "Beverly asked where your scarf came from while we were getting ready this morning. She kept saying she wondered what you were hiding." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. "I thought she was just being Beverly," Emily continued. "I never imagined she'd actually do something like that." Neither had I. Not really. Beverly had spent 6 years insulting me in quiet ways. Backhanded compliments. Little jokes. Comments that sounded harmless until you noticed I was always the target. But today she'd crossed a line I never thought she'd cross. Emily walked over and gently touched my arm. "I should have warned you." I shook my head. "You couldn't have known." She looked down. I think maybe I did. We stood there in silence for a moment. Finally, I asked, "How's Tyler?" She smiled sadly. Confused. That sounded exactly like him. Tyler had always hated conflict. As a teenager, he'd disappear into the garage whenever Mark and Beverly argued. He wasn't weak. He just wanted everyone to get along. I'd spent years trying to teach him that sometimes keeping the peace isn't the same thing as doing what's right. Apparently, that lesson hadn't fully stuck. Emily took a deep breath. "You know something?" "What?" "If this wedding happened 5 years ago, it wouldn't even be happening." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She gave a small laugh. "Mark almost lost everything." That wasn't entirely true. He hadn't almost lost everything. He had almost lost the business. 3 years earlier, his construction company hit a rough stretch after several commercial projects were canceled. Cash flow dried up almost overnight. He didn't tell many people, not even Tyler. But I knew. I'd watched him sit at our kitchen table night after night staring at invoices while pretending everything was fine. One evening, he finally admitted the truth. "I don't know how we're going to get through this." I still remember reaching across the table and squeezing his hand. "We'll figure it out." And we did. At least I thought we had. I quietly withdrew money from my retirement savings. Nearly $200,000. Enough to keep the business alive until contracts picked up again. I never asked for repayment. It wasn't a loan. He was my husband. That's what families do. A year later, when Tyler proposed to Emily, money was tight again. The venue they loved was more expensive than they could afford. Emily was heartbroken when she talked about canceling it. So I wrote another check. Not because anyone asked. Because I wanted them to begin their marriage without debt hanging over their heads. Nobody knew. Well, almost nobody. My father knew. He'd called me after I transferred the money. "Claire," he'd said, "you're generous." I love that boy. I know. Then he'd added something I never forgot. "Just make sure the people you're sacrificing for would do the same for you." At the time, I answered without hesitation. They would. Standing in that restroom, I wasn't so sure anymore. Emily looked toward the ballroom doors. "Your dad just walked in." I nodded. "He was at a veterans ceremony in Montgomery this morning. He brought your wedding gift." I smiled faintly. "He wouldn't miss Tyler's wedding for anything." "What do you think's inside?" I shrugged. Knowing my father, probably a handwritten letter and a savings bond. Emily almost laughed. Then the smile disappeared. Before either of us could say another word, voices echoed down the hallway. One of them belonged to Beverly. The other belonged to my father. And neither of them sounded calm. Emily and I hurried out of the restroom. The hallway outside the ballroom had filled with nervous guests pretending they were looking for the coffee station. Nobody wanted to admit they were listening. Beverly's voice carried through the open doors. I don't care who he is, this is a family matter. Then came my father's calm reply. It became my family matter the moment you humiliated my daughter. I stopped walking. Emily touched my arm. You don't have to go back in there. I do. My voice surprised even me. It wasn't angry anymore. It was steady. When we stepped back into the ballroom, every conversation stopped. Even the band had quietly set down their instruments. My father stood near the stage in a charcoal suit that somehow still made him look like he was in uniform. At 72, he had silver hair, broad shoulders, and the kind of posture you never really lose after 35 years in the army. His cream-colored gift envelope rested in one hand. The other held his suit jacket. The moment he saw me, he walked over without saying a word. He gently draped the jacket around my shoulders, covering the scars Beverly had worked so hard to expose. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. It was something a father does when his daughter is cold. I hadn't realized how exposed I felt until that moment. Are you all right? He asked quietly. I nodded. It was a lie. He knew it. But he didn't push. Across the room, Beverly folded her arms. Oh, please, she scoffed. We're acting like someone died. Nobody laughed this time. Mark finally stepped forward. Jim, he said, trying to sound reasonable, let's not make this any bigger than it already is. My father looked at him for a long moment. I've known you for 6 years, Mark. Mark swallowed. I respected you because Claire loved you. The room became so quiet I could hear the ice machine humming behind the ballroom bar. Dad continued. I expected you to protect your wife. Mark looked down. I was trying to keep the peace. My father shook his head slowly. No. His voice never rose. You were trying to keep your mother happy. That landed harder than if he'd shouted. Beverly stepped between them. My son was thinking about Tyler's wedding. No, Dad replied. He was thinking about avoiding an uncomfortable conversation. I looked at Mark. For just a second, I wanted him to prove my father wrong. I wanted him to say, Mom, apologize. Instead, he sighed. Claire, maybe we should discuss this later. Later. That word hit me harder than Beverly's insult. There had always been a later. Later after Thanksgiving. Later after Christmas. Later after her birthday. Later after vacation. Every time Beverly crossed a line later, somehow became never. The wedding coordinator approached cautiously. Excuse me, should we continue dinner service? Nobody answered. Then from somewhere near the DJ booth, the opening notes of Sweet Caroline suddenly blasted through the speakers. Bum, bum, bum. The poor DJ's face turned bright red. Oh, shoot! He slammed the mute button so fast the music died after only 2 seconds. A few guests couldn't help laughing. Even I almost smiled. The tension cracked for the briefest moment. My father actually chuckled. Wrong timing, son. The embarrassed DJ nodded. You have no idea. That tiny, awkward interruption reminded everyone we were still standing in the middle of a wedding reception, not a courtroom. Dad looked toward Tyler and Emily. I'm sorry this is happening on your day. Tyler finally found his voice. It's not your fault. He glanced at me, then at his grandmother. His eyes were full of confusion and guilt. Dad slowly lifted the cream-colored envelope. I wasn't planning to do this. He looked directly at Beverly. But after what I just witnessed, he held the envelope up where everyone could see it. I think it's time everyone learns exactly who Claire is. Every eye in the ballroom followed that envelope, including mine. Because until that moment, I honestly had no idea what my father had brought. My father rested the envelope against the podium instead of opening it. Then he looked at me. Claire, he said quietly, before I do anything, is this what you want? That question caught me off guard. Everyone else in that ballroom seemed ready for a public showdown. My father wasn't. He was asking for my permission. I looked around the room. At Tyler, at Emily, at Mark, at Beverly. For one brief moment, I wanted to grab Dad's arm, leave through the nearest exit, and never speak to any of them again. That would have been easier. Instead, I took a slow breath. I don't want revenge, I said. I want the truth. Dad gave a small nod. That's all I needed to hear. Before he could continue, Emily suddenly stepped forward. Wait. Her voice was soft, but every head turned. She reached into the small white purse hanging from her wrist. I think everyone should hear something first. Tyler frowned. Emily, what are you doing? She looked at him with tears in her eyes. I'm sorry. Then she pulled out her phone. I recorded something this morning. The room instantly filled with whispers. Beverly's smile disappeared for the first time all day. What are you talking about? She demanded. Emily's hands trembled. I wasn't trying to spy on anyone. She looked at me. I forgot my phone was recording while I was making a video of the bridesmaids getting ready. She opened the recording. It picked up a conversation after I walked out. Mark's face lost its color. Emily pressed play. At first, there was nothing except laughter and women moving around the bridal suite. Then Beverly's unmistakable voice came through the speakers. "So today's finally the day." Someone laughed. Another woman asked, "What day?" "The day everybody sees what she's been hiding." A knot tightened in my stomach. The recording continued. "If she insists on wearing that ridiculous scarf," Beverly said, "I'll simply remove it myself." A woman gasped, "Beverly, don't!" "Oh, relax," she laughed. "It's about time everyone sees what my son married." The ballroom had become completely silent. Emily looked down at the floor. "I wanted to believe she was joking." She swallowed. "I was wrong." The recording wasn't over. A man's voice entered. "Mark." "I don't want a scene." Beverly answered almost immediately. "There won't be one." Then Mark said something that made my knees feel weak. "Just don't ruin the whole night." The audio ended. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence was somehow louder than Beverly's insult had been. I stared at my husband. He refused to meet my eyes. "I didn't know she'd actually do it," he finally whispered. Emily looked at him. "You knew enough to warn her." You knew." Mark rubbed both hands over his face. I thought she'd calm down. Beverly pointed at Emily. "You had no right to play that." Emily straightened her shoulders. "I had every right." Tyler slowly turned toward his grandmother. His face was pale. "You planned this?" Beverly opened her mouth. "Tyler, you planned this?" For the first time in years, she didn't have an answer. Tyler looked at his father next. "Dad," Mark stared at the floor. "I made a mistake." Tyler laughed once. Not because anything was funny, because disappointment sometimes sounds like laughter. "A mistake." He shook his head slowly. "You let Grandma humiliate Claire." I know what you thought." Tyler's voice cracked. "You thought keeping Grandma happy mattered more than protecting the woman who raised me." Those words hit harder than anything anyone had said all afternoon. I felt tears building again. Not because of Beverly. Not because of Mark. Because Tyler had finally said out loud what I'd been afraid to admit to myself. My father quietly picked up the cream-colored envelope again. He looked around the ballroom. "I believe," he said calmly, "everyone is finally ready to see what's inside." He broke the seal. My father slid one finger beneath the flap of the cream-colored envelope and opened it with the same calm precision I'd watched my entire life. No dramatic pause. No raised voice. Just quiet confidence. He removed a neat stack of papers held together with a small binder clip. Beverly folded her arms. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she muttered. "Is this really necessary?" Dad didn't even look at her. "It became necessary the moment you decided to humiliate my daughter in front of nearly 200 people." He walked to the microphone the DJ had left on the stand. "I'm James Walker." He glanced around the room. "Most of you don't know me?" A few guests nodded politely. "I didn't come here to embarrass anyone." He looked toward Tyler and Emily. "I came to celebrate the beginning of your marriage." Then his eyes found Beverly. "But some things should never be ignored." He lifted the first document. "This is Claire's Purple Heart citation." A murmur spread across the ballroom. Beverly blinked. Dad continued. 20 years ago, my daughter volunteered to become an army medic." He smiled faintly. "Her mother worried every single day. I worried too. But Claire always believed that if someone was hurt, someone had to run toward them." He looked down at the document. "During her final deployment in Afghanistan, her convoy was attacked. The ballroom had become so quiet that even the waitstaff stopped moving. Despite being injured herself, she pulled 2 trapped soldiers from a burning vehicle." He paused. "The second explosion caused the burns and shrapnel injuries you saw today." Nobody laughed now. Several guests looked down at their plates. Others stared at me with expressions that had shifted from curiosity to regret. Dad reached into the envelope again. "This is a letter." He unfolded it carefully. It was written by the wife of Sergeant Daniel Brooks. He adjusted his reading glasses. "Dear Claire," he began. "Because of you, my husband came home to watch our daughter grow up. Every birthday she's had, every Christmas, every graduation. Our family owes those moments to your courage. Thank you will never be enough." He lowered the letter. "I've kept that note for years. I hadn't seen it since my retirement ceremony. I didn't even know he still carried a copy." Across the room, I noticed one of the older gentlemen quietly wiping his eyes. He wore a Vietnam veteran cap. Our eyes met for a second. He gave me the smallest nod. I nodded back. No words were needed. Dad removed another document. "This one surprises even Claire." I frowned. "What is it?" He smiled. "I'll explain in a minute." Before he could continue, Mark stepped forward. "Jim?" Dad looked at him. "I think she's suffered enough today." "I agree." Relief crossed Mark's face. Then Dad finished his sentence. "Which is why I'm going to make sure the truth finally catches up with the lies." The relief disappeared. Beverly took a step toward the stage. "This has gone far enough." Dad calmly held up one hand. No. His voice remained gentle. You've had 6 years to tell your version. He looked around the ballroom. I'm asking for 5 minutes. Nobody objected. Not even Beverly. Because for the first time all afternoon, she realized she was no longer controlling the room. Dad lifted the final document from the envelope. I recognized the county seal before I recognized the paper itself. A property record. I frowned. What? He looked at me and smiled. I think it's time your family learned who really gave Tyler and Emily their start. The room leaned in. Even I had no idea what he was about to reveal. I stared at the property record in my father's hand. For a moment, I honestly thought he'd picked up the wrong paper. I said quietly, what is that? He smiled the way he always did when he wanted me to be patient. This, he said, lifting the document so the front rows could see the county seal, is something Claire never expected me to keep. Beverly rolled her eyes. Oh, good grief. Are we discussing real estate now? My father ignored her. Last year, Tyler and Emily found a little brick house in Madison. Emily's eyes widened. The one on Willow Creek Drive. Dad nodded. That's right. Tyler looked confused. I don't understand. Dad unfolded another page. The purchase almost didn't happen. Tyler frowned. The bank approved us. They approved you, Dad replied, after someone covered the difference your loan couldn't. Emily slowly looked at me. No. I felt my stomach tighten. Dad, he gave me an apologetic smile. I'm sorry, sweetheart. You told me you wouldn't. I told you I wouldn't tell them unless I had to. He looked around the ballroom. Today, and I have to. The room became completely still. Dad held up the closing statement. Claire contributed $150,000 toward the purchase of Tyler and Emily's first home. Gasps spread across the room. Tyler's mouth fell open. Emily covered hers with both hands. No, Tyler whispered. No, that's not possible. It is, Dad answered. She insisted the money be treated as a gift. I closed my eyes for a second. I hadn't wanted anyone to know, especially Tyler. When he'd thanked me for helping with the wedding, I'd simply smiled and told him everything would work out. I wanted him to believe he'd built his new life on his own. Because every young couple deserves that feeling, Dad continued. Claire asked for one condition. Emily looked at me through tears. I never heard about any condition. Because she never told you. Dad smiled. Her only request was that Tyler and Emily never feel obligated to repay her. Tyler slowly turned toward me. You did that? I nodded once. I loved you. The words came out before I could stop them. I still do. He walked toward me as if he couldn't quite believe his own feet. Claire, his voice broke. Why didn't you tell me? Because gifts aren't supposed to come with receipts. He wrapped his arms around me. For the first time since he was a teenager, my stepson cried on my shoulder. I'm so sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. I held him tightly. You don't owe me an apology for someone else's choices. Behind us, Beverly finally found her voice. Well, she snapped, throwing money around doesn't make someone family. Nobody responded. Not because they agreed. Because they'd stopped listening to her. Mark stepped forward. His face looked older than it had that morning. Claire. I turned toward him. I never knew. No, I answered quietly. You never asked. He flinched. I would have thanked you. I wasn't looking for thanks. I paused. I was looking for a husband who'd stand beside me. His shoulders sagged. I failed you. Those were the first honest words he'd spoken all day. But they came too late. Dad reached into the envelope one last time. I have one final document. He unfolded a single sheet of paper. This one isn't about money. He looked directly at Mark. It's about trust. I recognized the page immediately. It was a copy of the agreement I'd signed when I withdrew money from my retirement account. Dad had made me keep copies of everything. He always said, hope for the best, prepare for the worst. I never imagined the worst would happen inside a wedding ballroom. Dad placed the paper on the podium. This document shows Claire withdrew nearly $200,000 from her retirement savings 3 years ago. A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. He looked at Mark. To save your construction company. Mark closed his eyes. He knew there was nothing left to hide. Nobody spoke for several long seconds. The only sound in the ballroom was the quiet hum of the air conditioning and the clink of dishes as one of the servers carefully set down a tray, trying not to interrupt the silence. Mark stared at the floor. I was going to pay you back. His voice was barely above a whisper. I looked at him for what felt like the first time all day. You've had 3 years, he swallowed. I know. No, I said gently. I don't think you do. He finally looked up. I thought once the company recovered, you'd remember. His shoulders slumped. I never forgot. I nodded slowly. I believe you. For just a second, hope flickered across his face. Then I continued. But forgetting wasn't the problem. He frowned. What do you mean? The problem was that every time your mother humiliated me, you expected me to understand. He opened his mouth. You expected me to forgive. Another pause. You expected me to stay quiet. I took a slow breath. And today, when she pulled off my scarf, I looked around the ballroom. You asked me to leave. His eyes filled with tears. I panicked. I know. I didn't think. I know. I was trying to save Tyler's wedding. I smiled sadly. No. He looked confused. You were trying to save yourself. That hurt him. I could see it. But it was true. He had spent years avoiding conflict instead of protecting the people he loved. That habit had finally cost him everything. Across the room, Tyler stepped between us. Dad. Mark looked at his son. I'm sorry. Tyler shook his head. I've heard you say that 3 times in the last 10 minutes. Mark blinked. I mean it. I think you do. Tyler's voice remained calm. But you're apologizing because you're ashamed. He paused. Not because you finally understand. Mark couldn't answer. Emily quietly took Tyler's hand. She looked at me. Claire, I smiled. You don't have to choose sides. Emily surprised me by shaking her head. I already did. She walked over and hugged me. Not the careful kind of hug people give someone they're worried about hurting. A real hug. The kind family gives. I'm sorry I didn't stop this. You tried. I should have done more. We all wish we'd done more. She nodded through tears. I still want you in our lives. Before I could answer, Beverly laughed. A short, bitter laugh. Oh, honestly. Everyone turned toward her. So now we're pretending she's some kind of saint. Nobody responded. She looked around the room, almost expecting someone to agree with her. No one did. Finally, she pointed at me. She's turning my own family against me. Dad answered before I could. No. He folded the documents neatly and slipped them back into the envelope. You did that yourself. Beverly's face turned red. You've always hated me. I barely know you. He spoke so calmly that it somehow made the words sharper. But I know character when I see it. She took one angry step toward him. This is none of your business. He smiled politely. The moment you attacked my daughter. He looked at me. You made it my business. The wedding coordinator quietly approached Tyler and Emily. I'm sorry to interrupt. She hesitated. The caterer needs to know. She glanced nervously around the ballroom. Should we still serve dinner? The question was so ordinary that several guests laughed. Even Tyler smiled. He looked at Emily. She squeezed his hand. Then he turned toward the room. We're serving dinner. He took a deep breath. But before we do, he looked directly at me. I have something I need to say. The room fell silent once again. I had no idea what my stepson was about to do. Tyler took the microphone from the stand and looked around the ballroom. His tie was crooked now. His eyes were red, and his voice carried the weight of someone who had just watched his family change forever. I know this isn't how anyone imagined today would go. A few guests nodded. He looked at Emily, then back at the room. But before we have dinner, I need to say something. He turned toward me. When my mom died, I was 14. The room grew still. I honestly believed nobody could ever fill that empty space. He smiled sadly. Claire never tried. I felt my throat tighten. She never asked me to call her mom. He laughed softly. She just showed up. A few people smiled. She came to my football games even though she barely understood the rules. That drew a little laughter. She helped me with homework. She drove me to college interviews. When I got my first apartment, she spent an entire Saturday putting together furniture from IKEA. Emily laughed through her tears. And she only complained twice. The room chuckled. Tyler looked at me again. I used to tell people she wasn't my stepmom. He paused. I'd tell them she was simply Claire. Another pause. I realized now that wasn't because she wasn't family. His voice cracked. It was because family wasn't a big enough word. I covered my mouth. I'd never expected this. Not today. Not ever. Tyler took a slow breath. I stood here this afternoon and said nothing. He looked around the ballroom. I watched someone who spent years loving me get humiliated. He shook his head. I'll regret that for the rest of my life. He turned toward me. I'm sorry. I walked over and hugged him. You've already made it right. No. He smiled sadly. I'm just starting. When we stepped apart, he faced his father. Dad, Mark looked up. I don't expect you to answer today, but I need you to think about something. Mark nodded silently. You always taught me that a man should protect his family. He swallowed. So why was Grandma the only one you protected? Mark's face crumpled. There wasn't an answer. Not one that could erase 6 years. Tyler gently handed the microphone to the DJ. I think it's time we celebrate my marriage. The DJ smiled with obvious relief. I've been waiting to hear that. Within minutes, the servers began bringing out plates of roast beef, grilled chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, and warm rolls. Conversation slowly returned, not because everyone had forgotten what happened, because life keeps moving even after painful moments. As guests stood in line for dinner, dozens of people stopped by our table. Some simply squeezed my hand. Others apologized for laughing. One elderly gentleman wearing a Korean War veteran cap introduced himself as Frank. He shook my hand firmly. "I don't know what happened overseas." He glanced at the scarf folded beside my plate. "But I know courage when I see it." "Thank you," I said quietly. "I appreciate that." Across the ballroom, Beverly sat alone. For the first time since I'd known her, nobody had gathered around her table. She kept checking her phone, but no one seemed interested in joining her. Mark approached me one last time before dinner ended. "I've been calling a marriage counselor." I looked at him. "I know counseling won't fix today."
No?
"It won't." He nodded. "But maybe it's a place to start." I smiled sadly. "I hope you become the man Tyler still believes you can be." He looked confused. "What about us?" I took a long breath. "There isn't an us anymore." His eyes filled with tears. This time, I didn't cry with him. I simply wished him well. Sometimes the hardest goodbye isn't spoken in anger. It's spoken with peace. 6 months later, I drove back to Madison, Alabama on a warm Saturday afternoon with the windows down and an old Eagles song playing softly through the speakers. Life looked very different than it had on Tyler's wedding day. The divorce papers had been signed 3 weeks earlier. There wasn't a dramatic courtroom battle, no shouting, no last-minute speeches. Just 2 people sitting across from one another, quietly acknowledging that some promises had already been broken long before the paperwork caught up. Mark apologized one last time before we left the courthouse. "I'll regret what happened for the rest of my life." I believed him. Regret was written all over his face, but regret isn't the same as rebuilding trust. I wished him well. Then I walked away. Since then, I'd settled into a rhythm that felt surprisingly peaceful. 3 mornings a week I volunteered at the VA hospital in Huntsville. The nurses teased me because I always brought homemade banana bread that was still slightly too dense. On Fridays, I met 2 retired Army friends for breakfast at Cracker Barrel. We'd drink too much coffee, complain about sore knees, and somehow solve all the country's problems before the biscuits arrived. Little by little, life felt like mine again. That afternoon, Tyler and Emily invited me to their backyard for a barbecue. Nothing fancy. A charcoal grill, folding chairs, a cooler full of sweet tea and bottled water. Their little brick house looked exactly the way I'd hoped it would. Lived in. Happy. Emily met me at the driveway with a hug. "I'm so glad you're here." I wouldn't have missed it. Tyler was standing by the grill wearing an apron that read King of the Barbecue. He laughed when he saw me. "I still burn the burgers." "You've been burning burgers since you were 16. And somehow you still let me cook." "I believe in second chances." He smiled. "So do I." A few neighbors wandered over carrying potato salad, baked beans, and peach cobbler. Nobody cared who had the nicest clothes. Nobody cared whose family had the biggest house. People laughed. Kids chased one another through the yard. Someone's Labrador stole a hot dog and took off running while 3 grandchildren from next door chased after him. For the first time in months, I laughed without forcing it. As everyone settled into lawn chairs with paper plates balanced on their knees, Tyler stood up and tapped his glass. "I just want to say one thing." The backyard became quiet. He looked directly at me. "When people ask who helped us build this home," he smiled, "I'm going to tell them the truth." Emily slipped her hand into his. Tyler continued, "Claire didn't just help pay for this house." He shook his head. "She helped build the kind of family Emily and I want to have." His eyes glistened. "She loved me long before I understood what that love really looked like." I felt tears sting my eyes. This time, they were good tears. I reached into my purse and pulled out the blue silk scarf, the same one Beverly had torn away. I unfolded it carefully. Then I smiled and tied it loosely around the handle of the rocking chair beside me instead of around my neck. Emily noticed. "So, you're not wearing it anymore." I looked out across the backyard. At Tyler laughing with his neighbors. At children running through the grass. At my father sitting under an oak tree happily arguing with another veteran about whose army coffee had tasted worse. I smiled. I don't need to hide anymore. That scarf had once been a shield. Now it was simply a piece of silk. I've learned that revenge isn't always watching someone else lose. Sometimes it's waking up one morning and realizing they no longer have the power to define how you see yourself. The deepest scars aren't always the ones people can see, and healing doesn't happen all at once, but it does happen. If this story reminded you of someone who quietly stood by you when you needed them most, I hope you'll carry that gratitude with you today. And if it spoke to your heart, thank you for spending this time with me. The end.